David Pepper is joining me now, former chair of the Ohio Democratic Party, and now the host, the creative mind behind the Trump's Project 2025 podcast, Trump's Project 2025 pod.com. And you can get it. You can subscribe and find it everywhere you get your podcasts. It's one of the things I wanted to talk with David about. David, it's great to have you back on the Scott Sand Show.
Good to be with you. That is quite a lineup tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks.
Man, I'm honored to even be mentioned on a show with so many huge guests.
You're always a huge guest. You're welcome anytime, David. You know that. Even though we're not going to agree on much, but congratulations on the podcast. Even though Trump has nothing to do with Project 2025, right?
Well, just a couple of things on that. Obviously, there's a lot of intersection between him and Project 2025. But that aside, what we're doing here is actually not just talking about that plan, but a lot of the chapters are about things that Trump himself says in his stump speeches on his website. So, I know he likes to run from it, and I think we could, he's done a decent job of trying to separate, although when you look closely, there's so much overlap. One of the biggest things of Project 2025 is actually reinstating an executive order he signed in 2020. So he could say he has nothing to do with it, but there are a lot of things that are basically things he already tried to do that got rescinded. But the bigger thing is some of the worst things that would happen if he were to win, like the Insurrection Act, are things that aren't in Project 2025 itself, but are things that he says he wants to do. And the podcast goes through those things. So it's not only about Project 2025, it's about his standard stump speech and things he promises that he can't remove, or things, like I said, that are on his own website. You do realize that politicians promise a lot of things that never actually come to fruition. And with regards to 2025, the Project 2025, we know that he has no idea what's in there because he doesn't read anything. That's the biggest giveaway. Yeah,
that's the biggest giveaway.
Well, here's the thing. Like I said, if you go, one of the biggest things in Project 2025, and you may or may not agree with it, I don't think it leads to good government, whoever does it, is this, getting rid of civil servants and replacing them with political hacks, to run all sorts of departments. That is, the heart of that is literally what he signed an executive order calling that was going to do that in the year 2020. All Project 2025 is saying there is, do again what Trump did the first time, but do it earlier so it takes effect. So, like I said, there's a lot of things or Project 2025, for example, says basically, get rid of Department of Education and replace everything with vouchers, no more federal funds for schools in poverty. Well, Trump says all the same stuff too. So, like I said,
and that's in part because we have a failed public education system.
Right. That's fine. And we can debate that. But my point is, when you actually read the thing, and then you read what Trump says all the time, or you look at his website, you actually see that it all kind of overlaps. And that's the point, that we can debate the different issues. You and I won't agree on all of them. But the whole point of this book is to say, here's what he says, here's what it says, here's what his people like David Miller say. So the whole point of the podcast is to say, well, this is kind of what it would look like. And, some people like you might say, well, great, that sounds good. I'd love to see that. Other people won't. But what I'm trying to do, and this is something that you may or may not agree with, but I think you probably will. Democrats are often quite bad at messaging. We always try and, we point to a bunch of factoids and data points, and we think that's going to win people over. And what this tries to do is actually show what some of the things that are being promised would look or feel like if they were to happen.
I actually think Republicans lately have been horrible at messaging as well.
Yeah, so the goal here was, I saw all these sort of bullet points of 40 things Project 2025 would do. And I would look at them and think, well, first of all, it's not good messaging. Second of all, some of them were not accurate. I actually would acknowledge they were things that were listed. I thought, well, I'm looking at it. I don't see that. And so my point was to say, and I think you know me well enough that I try and be a straight shooter. Okay, let's actually look what's in Trump's website, in his speeches, in Project 2025, and actually see what it says and try and make people see what would happen there. Project 2025, for example, absolutely goes after unions. It says that they should consider getting rid of public unions. It says that prevailing wage should basically go away. It takes an axe to overtime and other things, independent contractor laws. So I just try and spell it out for people. So whether they like it or not, at least lay out what all these things actually look like and would actually look like if they were to happen.
I like you personally, but I got to admit I have not listened to this yet. Is the podcast? Is it a dramatization? Is it a round table? Is it a lecture?
What it is it's basically imagining the year 2025. If Trump were to win, what if you take seriously the promises that he's making in his speeches? He wanted
so lower inflation, lower taxes, more jobs, and better national security.
No, that would be your Project 2025 podcast.
Right,
Mine is. You won't be shocked to know I'm finding the things that I find more disturbing. Like every stump speech he basically says, and you said earlier, well, we don't. That's a promise. Maybe it won't happen. I'm taking seriously what he says. I think in an election when someone promises something, it's fair game to take that seriously. In fact, I think it's the smart thing to do. Well, one of the things he says all the time is he doesn't think schools should get federal support if they have vaccine mandates. And so I have a chapter of, okay, what would a school without vaccines actually look like? In not much time, I think it would be a problem. So he also says all the time, and he tried to do it as president. This has nothing to do with 2025. He says that he thinks the U.S. military should be used to break up protests in American cities, the Insurrection Act. And I lay out, okay, if we do that, what does it look like? So the point is to try and draw out what do the things he's saying, because too often I don't think this stuff gets thought through. If you're going to do what he's saying he wants to do, what would it actually look like? If you had the actual military in a U.S. city doing what he wanted to be done, when he was president, but the generals wouldn't do it, how would that play out? What are the risks of it? And that's what I try and go through.
So if we're to take these campaign promises at face value and believe that they mean what they say, we should also believe Kamala Harris wants to confiscate our guns, all of our rifles, that she wants to have an electric vehicle mandate, that she wants to ban plastic straws, that she wants to pay for transitional surgery for prisoners and immigrants, illegal immigrants, and she's opposed to the border wall and securing our borders. So we should believe Kamala Harris based on what she has said.
What I would say is, if people, I think some of the things, and I think she's been criticized for this, but some of the things she has said she's changed her mind on. She said, apparently, and I don't remember every detail of this stuff, but apparently at one point she said she didn't want fracking. Now she says she does. I think people sort of can update some of their promises, but I think if people say things during a campaign, that is something that, and by the way, Scott, I'm sure you do repeat those, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm basically saying, and again, the point is to have people really think it through, and so we're not only sitting around debating, all the goofy stuff that comes up, but the whole point of this is to say that there's this long plan that's been laid out called Project 2025 that does overlap with Trump. And there are things that he is saying on a near daily basis that he wants to do. So let's imagine how those would play out. And that's basically what it does.
We're talking to David Pepper here on the Scott Sand Show. David Pepper, go ahead.
I was just going to say, what's been interesting is we're not just sort of reading boring stuff. And this is back to the Democratic messaging. We actually have each of these being read by, well-known people, either podcast folks or people who you've probably seen on TV or in movies, and I think it makes it pretty interesting. But one of the things I hope it does is you're not with you. I may not get far with this, but some of the things that Trump says he wants to do, I actually think would worry Republicans.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that most Republicans there's a reason we don't want to have the U.S. military policing domestically. He does say that all the time. He wanted to do it. So I try and lay out in a way that would actually cut against the grain. I would think some Republicans, some conservatives would hear that and think, oh, that's a terrible idea. Just like I think that in Ohio, we all know what happened when John Kasich tried to destroy unions, collective bargaining for public unions.
Well, I think Kasich screwed that up as well. But there are obviously things that I've been very critical of Donald Trump about and disturbed on everything from his behavior on January 6th and leading up to that and claims of the election being rigged or stolen. I'm alarmed with that, to to his calls for
weaponizing
new
the
tariffs.
DOJ.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
obviously there are things that I don't agree with. The podcast is Trump's Project 2025 pod.com to subscribe to that. We're talking to David Pepper. You can find him on social media that way as well. Also wanted to get your input, your thoughts, your arguments on issue 1. And we're almost out of time. Now, we could do a whole segment just on issue 1 on gerrymandering, which I got. Here's where I'm coming from on issue 1. I don't like either side of this. And it's going to be a very confusing vote because both sides are advertising it. Vote against gerrymandering, whether they're encouraging you to vote yes or no. It's oppose gerrymandering because that's true. This issue 1, if passed, would codify gerrymandering. That being said, the way we're drawing up maps right now is done horribly. I just don't like the way that issue 1 lays out either.
Here's the bottom line, and it says something that they are doing this. I mean, if you think it's good that the politicians draw their own maps, which we know that's leading to the worst gerrymandering we've ever seen, then you should vote no. If you'd rather have people who aren't the ones sitting in the districts they are drawing, so they're separate, 5 Scott Sandses and 5 Democratic and 5 independents, I would trust you, Scott, and 4 Republicans, 5 independents and 5 Democrats, as long as you weren't the elected officials yourselves in the maps, in the districts, I would trust 15 of you to get it right far more than I would trust the politicians themselves. So forget who's saying banning gerrymandering. They're obviously both sides now figured out that Ohioans hate gerrymandering, okay? It's breaking our state. Think about in any common sense scenario, do you want the people who are themselves in the districts drawing their own districts? I believe they are the last people we should want drawing these districts are the people who are in the districts, because politicians are going to feather their own nest, and what they've done with this is make sure they never themselves worry about their own elections. Or do we want anybody but them, and in this case, 15 people, 5, 5, and 5, who aren't running for office, who aren't in office, following a certain set of rules so we have fair maps? That's the decision. And I think, if you want to cure one of the worst gerrymandered systems in the country, which leads to the corruption we're seeing in Columbus, because they never worry about losing an election. Sometimes they don't even have opponents. If you want a system that the people who aren't the politicians themselves are drawing those maps, then you vote yes. I think that's actually the better way to look at it, since Republicans now are saying that even though they've been gerrymandering the state for decades, they're all of a sudden against it, at least. That's what they're trying to do.
Well, I do think it says a lot when you look at the people behind this issue, just as issue 1 and issue 2 last November, when you got $25 million in dark money coming in from out of the state in support of issue 1. I mean, this is outside tampering with Ohio politics by far left groups from outside the state.
I wouldn't call them far left, but when we see Mike Johnson, Steve Scalise, and the big Republicans in Washington saying vote no, it's clearly not because they care about fair districts in Ohio. They like having districts that favor having them. In Ohio, when Obama won Ohio by 4 in 2012, that same small majority, 4 Democrats, led to a 12-4 Republican Democratic map of Congress. So the idea that these outside forces like Steve Scalise and Mike Johnson, these are Republican House members, are doing this because they want to end gerrymandering is obviously a joke. This is a system that is, and again, my hope is this is one thing we can agree on across party lines too. We can go through each side like you just did. Do we want politicians basically totally unaccountable? It'd be like, I don't know your ratings, but if you kept your job, no matter how bad your ratings were, your show would ultimately, your radio shows wouldn't be very good. These politicians are in districts that they draw that they basically can never lose. And the reason why Ohio is up to its ears in corruption, and the reason our results as Ohio are not very good, if you look at almost any data point, we aren't doing very well, it's because the politicians have drawn for themselves districts that they never in their lives worry they can lose. And once you have no accountability...
I'm sorry.
What's that?
I'm sorry. There's a Marcy Captor stuck in my throat.
Wait, Marcy Captor, the Republicans...
This sounds like a better argument for term limits than anything else.
Hold on a second. No, hold on a second. Marcy Captor is in a tough district. That's why she has close elections. And by the way, those districts were drawn by the Republicans, not the Democrats. But by the way, to a serious point, if Democrats gerrymander, it's bad as well. Any
agree.
system.
I agree. Let's look at Illinois, Massachusetts, Vermont.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm about getting rid of it everywhere. And so what this system does, that if it were passed, it says get the politicians away from the table and let independent citizens do it. And that way, Democrats don't do it, Republicans don't do it. And by the way, yes, they should do that in Illinois. Yes, they should do that in Maryland. A lot of Democratic-leaning states have actually gone in this direction. Some Republican states have. It's a better system than these broken systems where politicians basically guarantee they don't lose. You know, in 2011, they gerrymandered the state of Ohio in a way that like 99% of the election results in the next 10 years were guaranteed in a hotel room in Columbus. What's the whole point of that? And what happens is, and I think you're making a joke about Marcy Kaptur, although in a serious way, and she hasn't had guaranteed election results. She's in a tough district. That's one of the toss-up districts in the country.
No,
but when politicians
this time around, but the Republicans have also put up horrible candidates against her.
Right, and that's fine. But I'm saying that she's not an example. You could point to Democrats having good districts. Hers is a tough district. When she retires, that's going to be a very hard district for Democrats to defend. But overall, when politicians are guaranteed to get reelected, that's when politics becomes what it's becoming, which is no one can get along. Frankly, they stop being public servants because they know they're going to get reelected. All they worry about is the primary, so they go more extreme. If you want to fix that, you vote yes on issue 1 because the only
hear me out now, term limits.
Yeah. Well, we have term limits in the Ohio legislature. That hasn't solved anything. Here's the problem. The lobbyists who influence these people do not have term limits. So they kind of control them more. I
got to take a break here.
Debate. Okay.
I love this conversation, David. You're welcome on anytime, and we'll continue to have this conversation. Let's talk again.
Before the election. Yeah,
absolutely.
We can talk about it again.
And again,
awesome.
Trump's Project 2025pod.com and follow David Pepper on social media. Okay. Got to take a break here.